Before I start, welcome to the channel. If you like first-person stories about betrayal at work, quiet revenge and consequences that hit like a truck months later, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what country you're listening from, because what I'm about to tell you starts with a plain white envelope on my desk and ends with my sister-in-law in handcuffs and my life completely different in ways I never saw coming. My name is Ethan Ward, and the envelope sat on my desk for exactly 45 minutes before I opened it. Standard corporate white, sealed with the deep blue logo of Holbrook Dynamics, the company I had helped shape for 12 years, back when it was still a refurbished warehouse on the edge of an industrial park. My name, Ethan Ward, Senior Director of Operations, was printed on the front in that cold, generic font they used for official correspondence. Even after all those years, that title still felt a little too big for the kid from the west side of Cleveland who started in the mailroom sorting packages and pushing carts. My wife's sister, Vanessa Holbrook, had taken over as CEO about 6 months earlier after her father retired. The old man, Gerald Holbrook, had built this company from almost nothing, turning a small fabrication shop into a manufacturing business worth close to $200 million. He had been tough but fair, the kind of boss who remembered your kids' names and showed up at company cookouts in rolled-up sleeves flipping burgers like he was just another guy on the line. Vanessa was nothing like him. She'd spent 10 years in venture capital in New York, learning how to strip companies down to the studs and unlock shareholder value. When she walked into a room, you could practically see invisible spreadsheets sliding across her eyes, sorting people into assets and liabilities. I knew what was inside that envelope before I even tore the flap. The signs had been there for weeks. Meetings I should have been in that suddenly didn't require my presence. Budget reviews where my department's numbers were dissected down to the penny while other divisions were approved with a nod. And that thin smile Vanessa gave me in the hallway, the one that never reached her eyes but always seemed a little too satisfied. I finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, cold, precise, efficient. We regret to inform you that your position is being eliminated as part of a corporate restructuring initiative. However, in recognition of your years of service, we are offering you the opportunity to resign voluntarily in lieu of termination. This offer expires in 48 hours. I read it twice, then a third time, and the words still blurred. 12 years of 60-hour weeks, missed school plays and baseball games, weekends at my desk fixing issues before they blew up on Monday morning. 12 years of designing systems that kept the whole operation running. And after all that, I was being given 2 days to choose between resigning and being fired. As I stared at the letter, my desk phone rang. It was Vanessa's assistant asking if I could come up to the executive suite right away. I looked at the envelope again, at the logo that suddenly felt less like a brand and more like a burn mark, and in that moment I made my decision. When I walked into Vanessa's office 10 minutes later, she wasn't alone. Daniel Brooks, the company's chief financial officer, sat stiffly in one of the leather chairs, staring at his hands like they were going to give him a way out. Vanessa stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, outlined by late afternoon light, the posture of someone who has never been on the losing end of a conversation. "Ethan," she said without turning around, "I assume you've read the letter." "I have," I said, and she finally pivoted to face me. "So," she asked, "what's your decision?" I glanced at Daniel. We'd worked side by side for 8 years. He knew every system I had built, every crisis we'd survived together, every late-night rework of our supply chain, every software rollout, every training session where we kept the place from falling apart. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. "I'll resign," I said quietly. Vanessa's expression barely changed, but for a split second I caught something flicker there, relief, maybe, or victory. "Smart choice," she said coolly. "Daniel will handle the paperwork. We'll need your resignation letter by tomorrow morning." "You'll have it on your desk by the end of today," I replied. That caught her off guard. "Already?" she asked. "No sense dragging it out," I said. "When something's over, it's over." I left her office and walked back through the maze of cubicles and glass partitions, past people who had trusted me and who had no idea that, by tomorrow, they'd be opening a bland company-wide email thanking me for my years of dedicated service in the driest language possible. Olivia in accounting, whom I'd promoted when everyone said she was too young and too green. Liam in logistics, whose entire department I'd fought to keep in-house when the board wanted to outsource his job to the cheapest bidder. Sophia in HR, who'd cried in my office the day her mother died and thanked me for letting her work remotely for months while she put her life back together. None of them knew that I was already halfway out the door. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you're still listening and you want to hear how this story really ends, hit subscribe right now, tap the like button, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been betrayed by family and business, because from this point on things get complicated, and you're going to want to see where it all goes. I spent the rest of that afternoon doing something I should have done years earlier. I documented everything. Every system I'd designed, every process I'd developed, every vendor and client relationship that flowed through me instead of through some clean chart in a PowerPoint deck. When you've spent over a decade working your way up from the bottom, you don't just learn the official procedures. You learn how things actually get done when the official procedures break. I knew which suppliers would extend credit when cash flow tightened because I'd spent years building relationships with the owners, not just sending POs through a portal. I knew which clients needed their hands held during implementation because I'd been in their plants and offices watching their teams struggle with change. I knew which software systems had undocumented workarounds because I was the one who'd written those workarounds when the perfect vendor solutions crashed under real-world pressure. And I knew something else, something I'd stumbled on about 6 months earlier during what should have been a boring, routine internal audit that turned into something very different. The resignation letter I wrote that evening was exactly 1 sentence long. I, Ethan Ward, hereby resign my position as Senior Director of Operations at Holbrook Dynamics, effective upon the complete settlement of all compensation, benefits, and contractual obligations owed to me, as described in my original employment agreement. No fluff, no memories. No, it's been an honor. I printed it, signed it, and hand-delivered it to Vanessa's office at 4:45 that afternoon. She scanned it and narrowed her eyes. "This is pretty bare," she said. "You asked for a resignation letter," I replied. "That's a resignation letter. Most people include at least a line of gratitude, maybe a wish for the company's continued success. I'm not most people," I said. "And right now I'm not feeling particularly grateful." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Fine. HR will process it in the morning. I notice you made the effective date conditional." "Just being clear on the terms," I answered. "I learned a long time ago that clarity prevents misunderstandings." I left her office and walked out of Holbrook Dynamics at exactly 5 o'clock, just like I had thousands of times before, except this time I was carrying a leather portfolio full of 12 years' worth of documentation, email threads, and some very interesting financial anomalies I'd uncovered during that so-called routine audit. When I got home, Laura was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, earbuds in, a podcast murmuring faintly. Our son Tyler was upstairs doing homework, music leaking through the ceiling, the usual soundtrack of a normal evening in a life that was about to become anything but normal. "I got fired today," I said, dropping my bag on the counter. Her knife stopped mid-cut. "What?" she asked. "Well, technically I was given the opportunity to resign," I said. "Your sister handed me a letter and gave me 48 hours to resign or be terminated." Laura set the knife down and turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Vanessa pushed you out," she said slowly.
Technically, I resigned, I repeated.
"But yeah, that's the idea." She was quiet for a long moment, and I watched something move across her face. Shock? Sure. But not the kind of white-hot outrage you'd expect from a wife whose sister just torched her husband's career. "What did you do?" she finally asked. The question hit like a slap. "What did I do? That's your first question." "I mean," she said, "Vanessa wouldn't just do this for no reason, right? What could have happened?" "So your instinct is that I must have screwed up," I said. "Not that your sister might be out of line after everything I've done for that company." "She wouldn't fire you without cause, Ethan," Laura said. "You must have done something." I looked at my wife of 16 years, and suddenly a lot of little things clicked into place. The way she'd been distant, the whispered calls she took in other rooms, the extra hours she spent helping Vanessa since their dad retired. I had chalked it up to family bonding. Now it felt like something else. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. "Known what?" "That Vanessa was planning to push me out." Laura didn't answer, and her silence told me everything. I grabbed my portfolio and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To talk to a lawyer who isn't going to start by asking what I did wrong," I said. That night, I slept in a hotel room surrounded by stacks of documents and an open laptop, mapping just how deep the rabbit hole went. The irregularities I'd found during that audit months earlier weren't simple accounting mistakes. They were deliberate and very illegal. Vanessa had been siphoning money out of Holbrook Dynamics through a web of shell companies. Nothing huge in a single shot, 40,000 here, 60,000 there, disguised as consulting fees, vendor payments, software licenses for tools nobody used because they didn't exist. Over roughly 2 years, she'd moved around $4.2 million out of the company and into accounts she secretly controlled. I had the paper trail, the internal access logs, the transaction records I'd pulled under legitimate audit authority, and, most important of all, I had a copy of my original employment contract from the early days when Gerald still ran the place like a family business instead of a faceless corporation. That agreement included language you almost never see anymore: profit-sharing clauses, intellectual property provisions that gave me partial ownership of the systems I developed, and a severance formula tied to seniority that Vanessa's HR department had forgotten existed when they generated my neat little file for the executive suite. At 6:30 the next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Ward," a crisp female voice said. "This is Rachel Singh with Singh and Partners. I represent Holbrook Dynamics. I'm calling regarding your resignation letter." "Good morning, Miss Singh," I said. "We need some clarification," she continued. "Specifically what you mean by effective upon the complete settlement of all compensation and obligations owed." "It means exactly what it says," I replied. "My resignation becomes effective once Holbrook Dynamics has paid everything it owes me under my employment contract." Papers rustled on her end of the line. "Mr. Ward, I have your personnel file here. It lists standard benefits and a severance package equal to 2 weeks' pay." "That's not the contract I signed when I joined the company," I said calmly. "That's an updated template your HR department created last year. I never signed it. My original contract, which is still legally binding, contains significantly different terms." There was a longer pause this time. "Can you send me a copy of this original contract?" she asked. "I'll send it to my attorney," I said, "and she'll forward it to you through the proper channels." "You've retained counsel?" she asked, a slight edge creeping into her tone. "Of course," I answered. "I'm a senior professional being pushed out of a company I helped build. Why wouldn't I have representation?" Her voice cooled. "Mr. Ward, I should advise you that any attempt to leverage your departure for additional compensation could be viewed as enforcing a legally binding contract." I cut in. "I'm not leveraging anything, Ms. Singh. I'm simply making sure my exit follows the terms Holbrook Dynamics agreed to when it hired me 12 years ago. If the company wants my resignation to be effective immediately, it needs to settle what it owes first." "And what exactly do you believe the company owes you?" she asked. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "I'll have my attorney send over a detailed breakdown," I said. "I think you'll find it enlightening." As soon as I hung up, I called the lawyer I'd met with the night before. Monica Reyes, a labor attorney with a reputation for tearing apart companies that tried to shortchange their employees. "Monica," I said when she picked up, "how would you feel about taking on Holbrook Dynamics?" 3 days later, Monica's breakdown landed on Rachel's desk. 40-plus pages outlining every obligation the company still had under my original agreement, and even I was a little stunned by the totals. First was the profit-sharing clause. Gerald had put it in back in the early growth phase to keep key people invested. I was entitled to a fraction of 1% of net profits for every year of service beyond my fourth, retroactive for the years they'd quietly stopped paying it out. After 12 years, that worked out to just over 3% of the company's net profit each year. Last year alone, Holbrook's net profit had been about $20 million. 3+% of that came to roughly $640,000, not including earlier years. Then there was the intellectual property clause. Any core system or process I developed that became integral to operations entitled me to licensing fees if the company continued using it after I left. I had created or significantly overhauled 7 major operational platforms. Monica's valuation put the licensing fees at around $2.1 million, either as a lump sum or through ongoing royalties. Next came the seniority-based severance formula. 1 month of salary for every year of service, calculated at my current pay level. 12 years at about $11,000 a month came to roughly $132,000. Finally, the non-compete provision. The standard language barred me from working for a direct competitor in a defined radius for 2 years. But Gerald's original version had a reciprocal clause. If the company enforced the non-compete, it had to compensate me for restricting my ability to earn. Monica estimated that compensation at approximately $400,000, representing my likely lost income over that period. In total, we calculated that Holbrook Dynamics owed me right around $3.3 million. Rachel called Monica's office within an hour of receiving the document. "This is outrageous," she snapped, apparently skipping pleasantries. "No court is going to enforce a contract with these kinds of terms." Monica's voice stayed calm and icy. "I'm looking at a signed, notarized agreement that clearly spells out each clause. Unless you're suggesting the signature isn't your client's father's, the contract is valid. It hasn't been superseded by anything Mr. Ward signed, and he never agreed to new terms. That means the original contract still controls." Silence. Then, "This is extortion."
No, Monica replied.
Extortion is forcing an employee to resign under threat of termination while quietly ignoring contractual obligations. Enforcing the contract on which he worked for 12 years is not extortion. It's the law. If Holbrook Dynamics chooses not to honor it, then Ethan's resignation simply hasn't taken effect, and he remains an employee with all the access his role provides. There was another pause. "What access are we talking about?" Rachel asked carefully. "Mr. Ward held a senior operations position with broad oversight," Monica said. "That includes access to financial systems for audit purposes. If he remains an employee, he retains that access. I would assume your client doesn't want a disgruntled employee with audit authority roaming around indefinitely." "This is blackmail," Rachel hissed. Monica actually laughed. "Here's some free legal advice," she said. "Have someone you trust look closely at the last couple of years of Holbrook's financials, particularly vendor payments, consulting fees, and software licensing expenses. Then ask yourself if your client really wants Mr. Ward continuing to have full audit access." The call ended. I was sitting in Monica's office when she hung up, and the satisfied smile on her face told me everything. "You got their attention," she said. "Do you think Vanessa will pay?" I asked. Monica leaned back in her chair. "Vanessa is siphoning money out of her own company," she said. "She cannot afford to have you hanging around with a badge and a login that can see everything. She's going to have to decide whether to pay what the contract already says you're owed or gamble that you don't know as much as you clearly know. And if she gambles, we'll show her exactly how much you do know." Monica drafted a letter that was equal parts artistry and threat. It didn't directly accuse Vanessa of criminal behavior, but it referenced specific dates, transaction IDs, shell entities, and dollar amounts that made it obvious we had her number. The letter ended with a simple sentence that said, in polite legal language, that I believed all of these issues could be most appropriately resolved by fully honoring my contractual rights, allowing both parties to separate cleanly and avoiding any need for further investigation or disclosure. In plain English, pay me what you owe me, and I won't blow up your life. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Rachel requested an in-person meeting. We met in a conference room at her downtown office. Rachel was there along with Vanessa and Daniel. Monica brought me and a paralegal who typed nonstop the entire time. Vanessa looked smaller than I remembered, and for the first time since she'd taken over, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before: fear. "Mr. Ward," Rachel began, "we've reviewed your claims and supporting documentation. While we dispute some of the valuations and calculations, we're prepared to discuss a settlement." Monica didn't even open her folder. Rachel slid a single sheet across the table. $900,000, she said, paid out over 2 years. In exchange, Mr. Ward signs a full release, agrees to strict non-disclosure terms, complies with the non-compete and waives any further claims. I picked up the offer, pretended to read it, then set it down and looked straight at Vanessa. "This is insulting," I said quietly. Vanessa spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. "Ethan, we're trying to be reasonable," she said. "Reasonable," I repeated. "You forced me out after 12 years, tried to pretend my contract didn't exist, and now you're offering me a fraction of what I'm legally entitled to. That's not reasonable. That's pathetic." "Those contract clauses are excessive," Daniel finally said. "They were written in a completely different era. They were written when this company was honest," I answered, letting a little blade edge into my voice. "When the person running it cared about more than squeezing every dollar before moving on to the next opportunity." Vanessa flushed. "You don't know anything about what it takes to run a company," she snapped. "You've never had to make the hard calls." "I know enough to recognize fraud when I see it," I replied calmly. The room went dead quiet. Rachel recovered first. "Mr. Ward, I strongly advise you to be careful with your accusations," she said. Monica put a hand lightly on my arm, a signal to let her take over. "My client isn't making accusations," Monica said, voice steady. "He's stating that he has concerns about certain financial irregularities discovered during routine audit activities, concerns that would have to be resolved before he could ethically sign any agreement preventing him from reporting potential corporate misconduct." Vanessa's hands trembled in her lap. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. I leaned forward. "I spent 12 years building systems and relationships that kept this company alive," I said. "I worked nights, weekends, holidays. I missed years of my son's life so I could be here making sure everything worked. And you repaid that loyalty by shoving me out the door and trying to cheat me out of what I'd earned. So yes, Vanessa, I would absolutely dare." Daniel looked at her with something like panic. "We need to resolve this," he muttered. Rachel pulled Vanessa aside for a whispered huddle that lasted a few minutes. When they came back, Vanessa looked exhausted. $2.7 million, Rachel said. "Paid as a lump sum within 30 days. The non-compete will be waived. We'll agree to a neutral reference, but the NDA and release are non-negotiable." Monica looked at me. I shook my head. "We want the full 3.3, Monica said. "Or we walk." "That's not happening," Rachel replied firmly. "Then we'll see you in court," Monica said, standing. Meanwhile, Ethan remains an active employee with full audit access until this is resolved. We were halfway to the door when Vanessa's voice cracked across the room. "Wait," she said. We turned. $3.1 million, she said hoarsely. "That's the ceiling. If I go higher, it becomes obvious what I'm really paying for." We all knew exactly what she meant. Monica looked at me again. I did the math in my head. It wasn't the full contractual amount, but it more than covered what I'd earned and then some. More importantly, it gave me a clean exit and shut the door on a war I didn't really want to drag out for years. "Deal," I said. "But I want it in writing today, and the money in my account in 14 days, not 30. Rachel looked like she wanted to argue, but Vanessa just nodded. "Fine," she said. The paperwork took 6 hours to hammer out. Just after midnight, I signed an agreement guaranteeing me $3.1 million in exchange for my resignation, my silence about the irregularities, and my promise not to sue Holbrook Dynamics for anything related to my employment. 2 weeks later, the wire hit my account. After Monica's 30% contingency fee, I walked away with just over $2.1 million, more money than I ever imagined having. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after I left, Holbrook Dynamics announced that it was under investigation by the federal securities regulators for financial misconduct. Someone had sent an anonymous tip packed with details about shell companies and bogus transfers. 6 weeks later, Vanessa was arrested. The investigation revealed that she'd stolen close to $5 million over 2 years, using increasingly complex tricks to hide the theft. She eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. Last I heard, she was serving 7 years in federal prison. Gerald came out of retirement to stabilize the company. One of his first calls was to me. "Ethan," he said, his voice heavy, I heard what happened with Vanessa.
I'm sorry.
I never should have handed her the reins without more oversight. It's not your fault, I told him. I also heard about your settlement, he said. It was smart, protecting yourself with that contract language. I learned from the best, I replied. You're the one who taught me to always get things in writing. He laughed, but there was sadness in it. I'm rebuilding the leadership team, he said. I know you've probably moved on, but if you'd be interested in coming back. I appreciate it, I said, but I'm already working on something new. My own consulting firm, helping companies build systems that actually work. That's good, Ethan, he said. That's really good. For what it's worth, you were one of the best people I ever hired. I'm sorry my daughter couldn't see that. As for Laura, we separated a few months after I left Hallbrook. The divorce was civil enough, but she had known about Vanessa's plan to push me out and had even helped her think through parts of the strategy. That was a betrayal I couldn't get past. Tyler chose to live with me most of the time. At 14, he was old enough to understand what had happened and to decide for himself how much time he wanted to spend with each parent. My consulting firm took off faster than I expected. Turns out there's a big market for someone who understands both the official procedures and the real-world workarounds that keep companies alive. Within a year, I had 6 major clients and was turning away more work than I could accept. Then last week my phone rang. It was Daniel. He'd left Hallbrook and joined a competitor that needed to rebuild its operations. We're looking for someone to redesign our entire ops structure, he said. After everything that happened, I know this might be a stretch, but would you be interested? I let him sit in that silence for a second. Daniel, I said, things didn't end badly. They ended exactly the way they needed to. And yes, I'm interested. Send me the details. Because that's the thing about being pushed out, about being told you're no longer valuable, about having people you trusted, especially family, treat you like a disposable line item on a spreadsheet. Sometimes it isn't the end of anything. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better. Vanessa thought she was getting rid of a problem, protecting herself and her little embezzlement scheme. Instead, she forced me to understand my own value, to stop accepting being underpaid and underappreciated, and to build something of my own. That one-sentence resignation letter that looked so simple when I printed it turned out to be the smartest thing I ever wrote, because it protected me, forced them to confront what they owed, and gave me the leverage to walk away with my head high and my future wide open. So if you're listening to this and you're stuck in a job where you're not valued, where they're pushing you out or pressuring you to quit, remember this. Know your worth, know your contracts, and never let anyone bully you into taking less than you deserve. A resignation letter doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the first page of a much better chapter. If the story resonated with you, don't forget to hit like. Subscribe to the channel for more true-style revenge and justice stories in the first person, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, because your next move might be the one that changes everything.